I've always felt worthless. I've always felt like I don't belong. But to be honest with you, that all changed until I met Jesus Christ, who helped me learn my true value. And I know for a fact that I'm not the only one who's ever felt that way. I know I'm not the only one who's had self-esteem issues. I know I'm not the only one who's had a negative perception of self. And here's the kicker. That negative perception affected every aspect of my life, affected everything around me. And it made me feel like I couldn't do anything. It made me feel like I wasn't capable of achieving anything because I thought I was so worthless. I felt weak, but that is until God so lovingly reminded me in 2 Corinthians 12:9 that in my weakness, his power is made perfect. So it didn't matter what I thought my weaknesses were. It didn't matter what I thought I was capable of doing or not. All that mattered is that I trusted God, and through his power, I am also made strong. My perception of self changed because I realized who I actually served. I realized that I serve the all-powerful God, that although I am weak, he is actually strong. And in that moment, God took me from point A, thinking that I was nothing, to point B, understanding that I'm the child of the King of Kings. And I know it's not an easy thing to do. I know it can be something super difficult. But just remember, you are not alone. God is going to be with you every single step of the way, reminding you that you are more than what you perceive yourself to be. And if only we submit ourselves completely to his will, sky's the limit. And in scripture, we also have someone who had a negative perception of self, who thought he was worthless, who thought that he was powerless. That is until God reminded him who he could be if he just let go and let God lead. In Judges chapter 6, verses 11 through 16, we have the introduction of my favorite Bible character, Gideon. Gideon's story has a weird start because Gideon is introduced hiding his wheat from his enemies. Now, the fact that Gideon is hiding his wheat from his enemies tells us a lot about Gideon. You see, the first time I read this story, I was like, Gideon's a coward. Why won't you fight? You're the chosen people of God. Why won't you fight? So since Gideon was given off the perception that he was a coward, you can understand why I was confused in verse 12. In Judges chapter 6, verse 12, it says that the angel of the Lord appeared before Gideon and said, I am with you, mighty man of valor. How could the angel of the Lord call this man, the man that was hiding his wheat from his enemies, a mighty man of valor? I always thought that the angel of the Lord was joking, that he had a mean sense of humor. But what I failed to realize is that God wasn't looking at Gideon with human eyes. God was looking at Gideon with the potential that he had if he just decided to let go and believe. Alone, he might have been a coward. By himself, he was probably weak. But God called him mighty man of valor to remind him that he isn't alone. That through Gideon's weakness, God is strong. But unfortunately, sometimes we have such a negative perception of self that one reminder isn't enough. Despite God calling Gideon a mighty man of valor, he didn't believe it. And he ended up putting all these different excuses of why he could not free the people of Israel. He was focusing so much on self and his negative perception that he lost sight of who would be guiding him. That's why Judges chapter 6, verse 15 always breaks my heart, because we get a glimpse of how Gideon viewed himself. We get a glimpse of Gideon's own self-esteem. Verse 15 says, "O Lord, how am I supposed to save Israel? My clan is the weakest in the tribe of Manasseh, and in my father's house, I am the least." Now let's break down what Gideon is saying. Manasseh is a tribe that's considered half a tribe. It's not even a full tribe. So what Gideon is telling God, that I'm coming from the smallest tribe, and in that smallest tribe, I'm coming from the weakest family, and in that weakest family, I am the weakest of them all. Essentially, Gideon was calling himself the weakest of the weak of all the weak. But despite how we may view ourselves, God looks at us with the potential that we have if we just trust in him. And that's what Gideon wasn't understanding. That it didn't matter that he came from the smallest tribe, from the smallest family, and in all of them, he was the weakest. That didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was that he trusted in God. And verse 16 gives Gideon another reminder. God tells him, I will be with you. And you know what, guys? God took that coward and he used him to free Israel. There's no telling what God can do in your life if you just let him take you from point A to point B. God took a coward and made him a hero. From point A to point B, he transformed him. Now the question is, how do you perceive yourself? What is your perception of self? Do you think you're worthless? Do you think you have no value? Now I'm here to tell you, you're focusing on the wrong things. Because if we focus on God, we will always be reminded that in our weaknesses, in our flaws, he is made perfect. Never forget that God has the power to transform you. God has the power to use you no matter who you think you are, no matter what you think you've done, God can still use you. If God can transform Gideon, there is no telling what he can do in your life if you just let go and believe.